Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Board of Alders Finance Committee. I shall begin this evening by reading the notice. Board of Alders notice. The Finance Committee will hold a public hearing on Monday, July 8, 2024, 6 o'clock p.m. in the Aldermanic Chambers, 165 Church Street, New Haven, to hear the following. Item 1, LM 2024-0436. Order of the Board of Alders of the City of New Haven authorizing the New Haven Free Public Library's request for 5-year contract with Presidio Managed Services in the total amount of $141,728 for the replacement of the library's phone system, including labor, software licensing, hardware, and a 5-year maintenance contract. Item 2. LM 2024-0447. Order to read and file the updated budgetary and financial reports for the month of May 2024 in compliance with Article 8, Section 5 of the Charter. These items are on file and available for public inspection in the Office of Legislative Services, 165 Church Street, per order of the Honorable Adam Marchand, Chair, attest Michael Smart, City Clerk. If you need a disability-related accommodation, please call 3 business days in advance at 203-946-7651 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY. Public comment/testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2 o'clock p.m. on the day of the meeting. Meeting may be viewed on Board of Alders YouTube page. We'll now proceed with introductions of committee members, starting to my right.
Honda Smith, Ward 30.
Sal Punzo, Ward 17.
Adam Marchand, Alder of Ward 25, Chair.
Ron Hurt, Ward 3.
Anna Festa, Ward 10.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone who is here. We have a fairly brief agenda this evening, and we're going to get started right away with the New Haven Free Public Library. So if the makers would please come forward, we'll be grateful for your presentation. When you do come to the table, please have a seat, and when you're settled, give us your names and addresses for the record, and then the floor will be yours.
Maria Bernay, 38 Crown Street, New Haven. Maria Bernay, 38 Crown Street, New Haven.
Karina Gonzalez, 5 Overbrook Road, North Haven.
Luis Chavez Bernal, 582 Ocean Avenue, West Haven.
Thank you very much. And you have some paper for us? Okay. Well, why don't we take a moment to get that into our hands?
Just a very simplified overview of the project.
Thank you. Yes, okay.
So our request is for to replace our current phone system. The last time it received an update was 2011. The system is aging. We are experiencing some intermittent issues with it, crackling, phone hardware failure. It is also reaching its 5-year end of life, which means that we no longer have a vendor that will maintain support for the contract itself. So if equipment fails, we no longer have someone to service it. The forums that maybe our IT team in the past has used, no longer, that content is no longer accessible. The security updates are no longer available for these items. So basically it's becoming, the technology is becoming obsolete. So the library is becoming in a position where we are forced to upgrade, which is why we have been, this has been part of the library's fiscal year goals for the last 3 years is when we began planning for this. Funding for this project is coming both from capital funds as well as general funds. The capital funds were included in the last round of requests back in December 2022 for the fiscal year 23-24 capital funding. So that these funds will come from that capital funding for the hardware and the labor for the equipment. Let me stop there. Are there any questions on the equipment?
Just go ahead and give the entire presentation.
Okay.
And then we'll ask questions.
Sure. So for the actual replacement of the equipment and the general funds, there is a full cost breakdown here of all materials that includes both the hardware for the desk phones, which there will be 94. That will also include an additional 2 conference phones on top of that. We do use our public spaces for meeting room spaces that members of the public can book. This, of course, part of the capital funds also includes the labor. So the hardware and the labor will be coming out of capital, and in total, those costs are $44,221. Our annual funds coming from general funds, it is spread out over 5 years. So this will include the software licensing as well as the maintenance costs for these devices. And so the total project over 5 years is $141,728.44. Really, the annual cost for the library do come in at about $19,000, $201.44. And that includes the maintenance, which is $7,500 annually, as well as the software subscriptions for the 96 units. Those are the cost overviews. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation. We'll now take questions from committee members in regards to this request for approval for a multi-year contract between the New Haven Free Public Library and the Southside vendor. Alder Festa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, and I think you may have actually covered this regarding warranty and upgrades. It's all included in the 5 years. And the upgrades, I'm not sure what the upgrades would be, maybe software and hardware. Do they replace any hardware if it's damaged within those 5 years, even if it's a phone?
So I'm going to turn that over to, this is Karina Gonzalez, who is our public administrator over technology for the library.
So there will be a warranty on the hardware. I don't know the full detail of the hardware warranty. However, it's subject to the manufacturer warranty. It's not covered under this contract for the hardware, but any maintenance service, that's covered under the maintenance contract.
Okay, thank you for that. And I did see, I think it was in your letter, I read it earlier, that you did go through an RFP process, and this was the vendor of choice. How many applicants did you have for the RFP?
We had around 8, and this was the lowest qualified bidder.
Okay, so sometimes the lowest qualified bidder isn't always the best. So are we missing out on anything that the other companies were offering that would have, I don't know, done any expanded on the services or anything?
Sure, good question. So we evaluated it based on these proposals based on price, the software solution, based on the reputation of the vendor, and based on reviews from other institutions who had implemented these solutions. And this one came to the top for the price, as well as the ease of use for the solution. It's more user-friendly. Also, the vendor has a great reputation, and across those major factors, it seemed the best choice.
Okay, so it covers all of the needs of the library and
Yes.
anyone who would use it.
Yes.
Okay, you know, that doesn't come lightly from me when I say that the lowest bidder is always.
I know.
Alder Festa, I was shocked.
I know, I'm sure, so I had to explain myself. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Festa. Further questions from colleagues for our colleagues from the New Haven Free Public Library? Questions from colleagues? I have a few. We're going through a transition in my home from landline, copper wire going from the pole to my house, to a fiber optic. set up, not because we really want to, but because Frontier tells us that we basically have to. Is that the situation here? Could you say more about the technology change that's happening and why it's happening and why we're going in there?
Sure. So our current system is on premises, which means it lives in our library. The equipment was purchased in 2011. It is already out of service for 5 years, so there are no technicians that are taught to maintain it. We have a managed services provider, Novus, and they basically have to kind of figure out parts of it in order to help us. But in general, they do not service this system. So basically, we have to move to a new system. A lot of the issues we're having now are based on the age of the equipment, the sound issues in particular, and also if anything happens to this equipment, we will be down for an unforeseeable amount of time. And so while we do perform backups, that's not guaranteed to restore this equipment once it fails. With a transition to something like Zoom Phone or a cloud-based system, that takes away that worry. It's already backed up by in the cloud, so we don't have to deal with that worry of the equipment failing. It will also be easier to maintain in the long run. But it is not, as an IT person, we do not like to pay for subscriptions. And so this was a very difficult decision for us to go to this route. And it really was for efficiency, to be able to make changes quickly, and to be able to have a service that is more reliable for our patrons.
I'm going to continue with my analogy, even though it might not be very apt. So, sure. But maybe add a new one. One of the concerns my family had about moving from copper wires in a traditional phone service to a fiber setup with a voice over internet protocol is that we were worried that, like, what happens if the internet goes down? What if the cell phone towers get hurt? Like, our experience is like the traditional phone systems are robust and they're not going to go down, or at least not all. Different things will go down, right? So that's maybe not the exact analogy here, but you talked about the difference between having the equipment on site that you're responsible for versus paying for a service. You kind of put in your communications, at least in the hands of this outside vendor. I guess that's why the reputation was so important. How long is this technology? How long have they been doing this kind of technology, and how confident do you feel like they have robust backups and things like that?
Presidio has been doing it for at least more than 30 years. Mm-hmm. They do have a long-standing reputation. But to go back to your analogy, so the library already transitioned away from copper lines back in 2011. So we are unfortunately still beholden to the internet. If the internet goes down, our phones do go down now. And so right now what we're seeing is any outages that we're seeing, which happen at least once a month, are happening because of the equipment and not because of the internet. We have made a lot of great changes to our bandwidth for our internet, so hopefully this will prevent these outages, but I definitely understand what you're saying. Fortunately, we already moved past the
that ship has sailed. So let me make another analogy. Maybe it's a little bit more apt,
sure.
And then I'll yield to my colleague for his questions. But every tech company that I do business with, such as Apple, for my phone, they want me to move to cloud-based storage of everything, which I don't like. Like I'm the guy with a bunch of pictures on my hard drive and backup hard drives. And I don't like the idea of my pictures of my kids when they're infants being backed up in the cloud. I want them on a physical device in my fireproof box in the basement, right? So, but that's the idea of like having your stuff on premises that you have control over versus giving over to some other entity that's going to store it somewhere else. So I guess I'm kind of relating to that. Like it must have been So was there any option for that? Like some other route you could have taken that would not have been a subscription, that would have if maybe not that old equipment, but a new set of equipment that you could have purchased that might have done the trick, or is that just not even a possibility?
It is a possibility. However, so that was my initial plan. However, to do that requires an expertise that is beyond me and my team. We're separate. Our IT is separate from the city, so it would take, extra staff to maintain updates, to be able to configure it, to make sure that it's configured correctly. And in this case, we needed experts to come in and do this for us. In terms of having an on-premises solution, it brings in another cost of the backups. Versus building in the cost of a cloud-based service, it comes out to about the same.
Okay. Great. All right, no more analogies to my personal technology.
Questions from colleagues, Alder Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. What do you have in place should the warranty, the guarantee, what is it, 5 years?
Yes.
What happens after 5 years? I mean, we've had the system since 2011, and it's 2024 now. So what are we going to do to make sure that there's no lapse or no problems going forward?
Sure. So, good question. After 5 years, there is the option to renew with the same vendor, or we can use the solution with another vendor for maintenance support. If we're having issues with the service, we can talk about transition. It really depends on how this goes. I know that's not the best answer, but with this solution, we may be able to maintain it ourselves after 5 years. Yes.
So, if I may ask this question, what happened when in 2011 we got the service? 5 years it was supposed to be renewed, or what happened?
Good question. I don't know. I think I was here, but I had just started, I think. I'm not quite sure. This has been on the docket for us for a long time. We just really haven't had the funds. Also, this department, the IT department of the library, has experienced a lot of transition. And it's really with me in this role that we've had a sustainable team to be able to carry this through. It's overdue. I definitely agree.
Currently, if the system does go down, currently our IT team, as Karina mentioned, along with Novus, who does IT work for the city and for the library as well, they'll jump in and we'll try and put something together, some sort of they're trying to problem solve as issues have popped up. There is a solution that they've used, the vendor that it's $500 per hour for any sort of troubleshooting. So it is not cost effective in the sense of if you have a project that is going to take multiple hours or a very difficult challenge to solve, it's not really economically the best choice to spend all of this money to problem solve an antiquated, aging 14-year-old system. So they've been sort of patching things together. We're slowly losing the number of access phone lines, but for hardware devices. And that's the great thing, is that this is interchangeable. So if we do, we can use the same hardware with a different vendor down the line.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Hurt. Further questions from committee members? Further questions? Just a couple more, although no more analogies to my personal technology issues. Does this new technology bring new functionalities that would be helpful, or is it just restoring the service that you have needed and are starting to lose?
So right now we've lost access to be able to update our greeting outgoing to the public. So you just immediately with the new system will be able to have customized, our menus, be able to make our services more accessible to the public. A lot of our public rely on telephone. They call us. That's our main source of contact with them. And our current phone system is not the best. And so, just, day and night, it will be evident from easier to use. Our staff will be able to use something more efficient. Also, the sound quality, night and day as well. We currently have a bit of a lag with our current system, and it makes it difficult for, our patrons to hear us and for us to hear their questions and answer appropriately. So just in those three things, you'll see an immediate impact. We also have a safety component. It comes with a safety alert system, and also it has built in a PA system as well, so it will allow us to, make articulate announcements over the loudspeakers at all locations. So you take that for granted, I think, after many years.
Okay, great.
An added feature is also the voicemail transcription. So because it is VoIP phones, because they're cloud-based, when someone leaves a voicemail, it does the transcription, which is very helpful if the folks who leave messages in different languages, we can at least translate them. My Spanish is not so great, so trying to catch that is difficult. So that is an added feature for just our ability to serve the public better as well.
Further questions from comments?
My last question is, in the letter that you wrote to our president requesting that this be put on the unanimous consent calendar, which it was not, you said that the pricing would hold until August 1st. We won't vote on this. The soonest we could vote on it would be at our meeting on August 5th. So, so is the pricing going to stick beyond August 1st? Have you talked with the vendor? Are they willing to hold it until the beginning of September, for example?
Yes, I did confirm this with the vendor. I did tell them that the process would take a bit longer, so they will hold it until September 1st.
Great. I assume, though, that you would like for us to vote on it in August.
Yes, please.
Okay. That's just for our information. It affects what we do here tonight.
Further questions from colleagues?
Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. And you may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a member of the public here who wishes to testify on this item? Is there a member of the public who wishes to testify on this item? And for a third time, is there a member of the public here who wishes to testify on this item? Seeing none, we're going to move forward in our agenda. The next item is the monthly financial report for the month of May. If our staff would please come forward. And while they are coming forward, I would like to recognize our colleague, Alder Walker-Myers, who has joined us with a special +1. I see that there's paperwork, so let's get that distributed. You did already. You're already on top. When you are ready, gentlemen, names and addresses for the record, please.
Michael Gorman, 45 Jefferson Road, Branford.
Ron Gizzi, 219 Rainbow Terrace, Hamden.
Push mute on that for a second. Push mute on that. Push it, hold it for it. Push the mute on it. Push it, push and hold it. All right, unplug that one. No, that's it. Just that one. Then push the button. There you go. So that's what you do. When you hear something, you mute it, and if that fixes it, you have to hold that mute button.
All right, thanks. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
What you have before you is, the May 2024 monthly report. So what we'll do is we'll just go over a few of the highlights and, what really makes up the difference between when I was here last month versus what you see this month. As you can see in the May 2024 report, the city went from a deficit to a surplus of $1.2 million that the city was forecasting as of May. Again, as we mentioned prior, there are many things that make up these forecasts. There was additional favorable variances on the revenue side that helped our revenue, and then we did see some expenditures decrease from what we were projecting between April and May. So again, the May 2024 report really shows a surplus of $1.2 million through May. So what I'll do is briefly go through some of these revenue and expense items. On the tax side, we did see a slight decrease in taxes when you look at, well, these are pages from the monthly, so this is page 7 as labeled on the bottom. But we did see a slight decrease in the tax projection based on a couple of appeals and forecasted revenue when we compared the last couple of years of taxes to where we are now. We are still expecting to meet budget on the taxes within fiscal year 24, but we did see a slight variance on the tax side. Moving on to page number 8 on the grants. Again, as we discussed the last couple of months, we are looking at $3.9 million ahead of budget when we look at the overall state grants that were received by the city. Again, this is primarily due to the municipal revenue sharing account of 1.7 million, which is not a budgeted item just because that's a reconciliation with the state. As I discussed prior, if they have a surplus in that account, they send it to cities based on a formula. If there's nothing left in the account, then the city doesn't receive any revenue. So that's one of the areas that we actually do not budget for because it depends on state tax receipts and other receipts that go into that account. But overall, the city is forecasting $3.9 million ahead of budget. When you move on to page 9, section 3 shows our license permits and fees. Again, I believe I mentioned at the last meeting, we did see an uptick in building permits, which really wasn't forecasted. So we are looking at about $2.8 million ahead on the building permit revenue side for fiscal year 24. On the interest income, which is the money in the bank account, we are looking at $3.4 million ahead of budget. When we compare what we've actually received and our forecasting to the budget, again, we've seen favorable rates with different bank accounts that we have. The new city controller has been great in reviewing those bank accounts to make sure that we are getting the best interest rates possible on the account. So that's something that she currently reviews every so often, but we are seeing variable returns in that account. Towards the bottom of the page, parking tags, again, we've discussed that throughout the year. That is one of the accounts that we are looking at not meeting budget on for this fiscal year. The forecast right now is about 1.5 million as far as not meeting budget on parking tags for the year. So going to page 10 is just the overall remaining revenue forecast, but we are looking at about $3.8 million ahead when you compare all the negative variances to the positive variances on the revenue side. And again, as I mentioned at the last meeting, one area that we look at is listed under federal aid. Just as a reminder, that's the ARPA funding that we can use for the provision of general services. So that number may fluctuate as we close the fiscal year, but again, whatever we don't use is very important that the budget office and the economic development office have been the two departments running ARPA that, we allocate and obligate that money by December 31st of whatever we don't use for this budget cycle. So again, 3.8 million ahead on the revenue side. On the expense side, again, which is the next page labeled 13, we are looking at a deficit of about $2.5 million, and that deficit is primarily made up of the Board of Education. Again, I've talked to the CFO, and they are working to reduce that deficit. They are looking at lowering that number, but possibly not getting rid of the deficit. I believe their number is around $2.4 million is where they think they're going to end the year at. So good thing about this projection is it's not good that they have a deficit, but this projection was counting for a little bit over $4 million as a deficit. So anything that they shave off of that deficit would just increase the surplus that was listed on that front page. So again, that news was basically as I was helping the budget office prepare this monthly report of that $2.4 million number. So barring any significant changes, going into when they produce the June report, that surplus number would increase based on that number. But we are looking at being on budget between a lot of the other city departments. Obviously, police and fire are two major departments. At the time of the projection, the police department was seeing about $1.7 million surplus within their department, and that includes the overages in overtime versus what they're saving on the salaries from the vacancies that the city has had throughout the fiscal year. So when you compare everything, they were looking at a surplus of 1.7 million. Again, with closing the fiscal year, we're currently reconciling a lot of the items. So again, that was the forecast as of May. The fire department was looking at a little bit over $500,000 within their line item. So those are two of the city's largest departments. One of the areas that I'll point to is expenditure reserve. You'll notice that has a $2 million deficit in that. So expenditure reserve really covers a lot of the unanticipated expenses, and normally that's covered through the closeout transfer that you would see. So unanticipated expenses may be matches on grants that we have to do during the fiscal year or in cleanups or things like that funding would cover. So what we tried to do was try to project out the worst case scenario on that particular line item for that expense account. So again, overall, we would see about a $2.5 million overage on the overall expenditure budget. And I am just going to go to the next couple of pages, which is something that we've seen really just list out personnel and vacancies in the monthly report. But going to what is labeled as page 93 of 96, really looks at our workers' compensation internal service fund. We did see a slight uptick in what we are forecasting when we compare year over year. We're looking at about $10.4 million in workers' compensation claims that would have been paid out of this internal service fund. Now, just as a caveat, some of these claims that were paid were really also settling a lot of older claims and other claims. So the anticipation is that the number for fiscal year 24-25 would be less for this particular fund. But again, workers' comp is just like medical, right? You can't predict what we're going to pay out on the slip and fall or, whatever may happen on the workers' compensation side. But we did see a slight uptick when you compare year over year with this particular fund. As I mentioned prior, we do have an aggressive return to work program and other programs that the workers' compensation office does administer. So I know between workers' compensation, human resource, policy management, and grants, they have been working hard on looking at this program and making sure that they are monitoring the claims themselves. But again, in looking at some of these claims were settling past years of workers' compensation claims that have been open. So the next page, labeled 94 of 96, deals with the medical fund. So when we look at the month of May, we did see a decrease in the actual claims, which is that first section. So we were about 670,000 less than when you compare it to the previous year. Again, with medical, the city of New Haven has fluctuated during the year. As you look at that column of the net changes between 24 and 23, you'll see some months have been up very big, over $1 million, but then we've saved on other months. So again, medical is something that you really can't forecast or predict, especially being self-insured, and the city pays the claims as they come in, and we reconcile and we true up the account as we're closing the fiscal year. So again, for the month of May, you'll see we were about 670,000 less than the previous year. For the month of June, we are projecting slightly more, just to try to take into account those reconciling items in case anything comes up. So we did add in a slightly higher number for the month of June, which you'll see at 2.1 million. But when you go to the bottom of the page, you'll see we are looking at the overall medical expenditures to be about $1.4 million higher than the last fiscal year, which is pretty good. The average is normally 5 to 7%. Now that was also the average prior to COVID. We know COVID threw medical claims out of whack, so that's why you kind of see those numbers on the bottom from a percentage standpoint all over the place when you look at the increase year over year. But the average is normal. The normal average is about 5 to 7% year over year. So looking at this forecast, we're about 1.17% when you compare the previous year to where we're forecasting this year. And then on the revenue side, again, the first box is really what we're looking at between employee cost share versus employee cost share and contribution from grants. We are slightly less than the previous year, but again, that also depends on the number of employees we have on grants and who takes medical and who does not. So again, that's a number that will fluctuate year over year. The prescription rebate, you'll see we're projecting $6.2 million in prescription rebate costs, which is slightly higher than the previous year. And then the general fund number, which is the general fund contribution to this account, is just about the same as last fiscal year. So what makes up the medical revenue side is really the general fund and the employee cost share. That's a majority of the revenue for this fund. But again, the general fund number is about the same as last year, slightly less. So with this particular medical fund, we are projecting this to be on balance for the fiscal year. So I do believe that is the overview and the presentation that I have for the committee. I'll be happy to answer any questions along with Mr. Disney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gorman. Questions from committee members about this monthly financial report for the month of May 2024? Questions from committee members? Alder Festa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Gormany. I know it's hard to really, did you bring your fortune teller? Do we expect a surplus fund bigger than the 1.2 million? How are the books looking? I know we don't really close until, a couple more months, but do we see positive growth there?
Yeah, I mean, we are looking at positive growth, as you said, to possibly adding on to that $1.2 million number. Again, even in this current projection, we have the Board of Ed at a $4 million deficit. So even if they hold steady at 2.4, which is what they advertised, then that will only increase that number. Again, as I mentioned, part of what goes into this forecast is open encumbrances, which are open purchase orders. So if you save on those as well, because when we do these forecasts, we treat it like it's going to be spent, just to make sure we give an accurate number. So even on that column D on the expenditure page, which says committed/encumbered, if there are any savings off of that number, that would just increase the surplus as well. So again, there are potentials to increase that number from the 1.2 million that you see in this report. Now, again, what we also have to be cognizant of is the unknown as well, right? So like I mentioned, the medical, for example, that can easily come in, we have in this forecast $2 million. If it comes in at 3.5, then, that drives down that number. So the budget office is always constantly watching that, but there certainly is potential to increase that number.
You mentioned the Board of Ed, and I mean, everywhere that it looks like the Board of Ed approved or they passed a budget with a deficit of 2.4 million, which I don't know how you balance a budget with a deficit, but anyway, they brought it down to 2.4 million, which, considering it's over $200 million budget, I know I'm shocking you all tonight, but 2.4 million really is just a little dent, considering the $200 million. So hopefully they can make up that $2 million somewhere. But what are your thoughts on that from working with them?
From my experience working with them, I know their CFO has looked at every area. I mean, they've done like the city side has done in the past of looking at positions, right? Making sure that we fill the important positions, any attrition savings, looking at maximizing transportation or tuition costs or maximizing grants. That's really one of the ways that they've been able to close the deficits in the past years is maximizing their grants. But some of those grants have started to dwindle down in the last couple of years. So that option's not really available as much as it has been in the past. So I think if they're holding steady at $2.4 million, again, that would increase the surplus that we're reporting. I mean, to be quite honest, it goes year by year, right? Because it depends. Right now, the city can cover it, but what happens in a year where the city can't cover it, right? So that's really what has to be worked on with the Board of Ed. But as long as they hold steady at 2.4 million, this number is going to go up, barring anything on the city side. So
you mentioned their grants are diminishing. What does that mean? Is it that we're not applying for more grants? Is it?
I mean, they've seen some of the grants that they've gotten in the past come down because some grants may be based on enrollment. For example, their inter-district fund. ones, right, which are the magnet schools. Those are based on enrollment. So if there's less enrollment, that's less funding that you see from the state. So I don't think it's really, I think there are a lot of different factors that go into their grant funding. It's not always black and white, but interdistrict is one that I can think of off the top of my head where it may be based on the enrollment. So if you have less in those magnet schools, you get less funding for those schools. And then they have grants like ESSER that may have been federally funded and, those are not being renewed. So again, it's different grants that they're getting.
Okay, so hopefully they'll look at all that. I don't want to dwell on the Board of Ed because we can always have a workshop with them. And you mentioned let me just find it here. You mentioned workers' comp, but that's settlements from the past that are, or cases from the past that are being, some are, but this return to work program, what do they think is happening? Do they have a say as to, do they see a trend?
Well, again, I think it's the comp office working with human resources and then policy and management. And then they work with different departments. So what they generally do is they have meetings with like public works, for example, to look at what employees are on comp, how long have they been on comp, can they go to light duty, can they return to full capacity, things like that. So they have meetings monthly with different departments, and that's the program that, the city departments manage that would reduce the comp claims, basically, is actually looking at the program and reviewing someone's, where someone is at with their comp claim.
And just debt service, why is that at a deficit? How is that at a deficit? Because I thought that's something that we have a fixed cost to.
So debt service is a fixed cost, but there has been something that we've also paid for as part of debt service called fee cap, which is that $3 million line item that you see there. So again, as school construction winded down, there was a line of credit that was open, and until schools are audited, we have to keep that line of credit open. So we do pay interest and other things on that particular line of credit, which is part of debt service itself. So what we started to do was just kind of break it out I think we started like 3 or 4 years ago, just breaking out that number so we have an accurate depiction of what that's made up of. But that's basically what that line is. Again, that line of credit has to be renewed until all the schools are basically audited. And that's a combination between the Board of Education and the state that does that.
What's the time period for that? And when we audit, do we audit a couple at a time over X month?
It depends. It's not just the city, but it's also at the state's timeline as well. And sometimes the state doesn't move as quickly as you would want, or it depends on when the city submits paperwork or the Board of Education submits paperwork and where the state is at with that paperwork. So it's a combination of both, basically, from a time frame perspective.
Because that's somewhat hurting us. I mean, yes, it's $473,000, but that's this year.
Yes, it is something that we have to account for and that we look at on a year-by-year basis as far as that line of credit and the interest that we're paying from that account. So.
All right, well, I appreciate the explanation. Just lastly, Mr. Chair, we need to be careful. We have, the federal aid, as we mentioned, the ARPA funds. This is it. And I know you're saving those $3 million to possibly, if necessary, use to balance the budget. But we have to remember for next year, we don't have these funds. And if we have to use those funds to balance the budget, what's going to happen next year?
Yes, something I certainly has to be looked at are some of these revenue sources that are within the general fund. And again, as I mentioned prior, the city is looking at redoing the 5-year plan that would certainly take into account some of these scenarios that we see in this year's budget, next year's budget, and how we forecast going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Festa. Questions from colleagues for Mr. Gormley on the monthly financial report for the month of May? I don't have a question. I'll just note that there's a significant increase in the number of high-cost claims. Last year was 25 individual cases. Now it's 31. And let's hope there aren't any more in June for the sake of the individuals going through the health issues, but also for the sake of our books. It seems to me that it's wise to be cautious in looking at what June might look like, because it seems like we have a tough year in terms of high-cost claims. So I'll just note that. I don't know that there's a question there. Any questions from colleagues about this item? Seeing none, thank you very much. And before you go, do you want to just tell us who's this person sitting in the row back there? Who,
So
maybe she'd come forward and say hello.
sure. I don't know. So as you know, I have been and will continue to assist part-time as much as I can. But on the action report, which I know goes to the alders and everyone, we did hire someone for my replacement, which started today. So Ms. Shannon McHugh, welcome. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Shannon McHugh. I'm from Connecticut. I've lived in New York for about 20 years, and I'm returning to Connecticut. And I am the budget director, and spent most of my time in New York City. Started out working for the Office of Management and Budget. From there, I worked for rating agencies. I worked for Moody's for a number of years. I worked for Fitch, was my last job, so I worked there for about 9 years. I also did government banking for U.S. Bank. So, I spent all of my time in public finance and studying budgets and writing reports about how well municipalities manage their budgets. And now it's my turn to put all of that into action and work on the budgets and bring all all that experience that I've had over the years in learning about different municipalities. What have they done to improve their financial position? What are some of the best practices? What are some things that didn't work? I bring a lot of those stories and lessons with me, and I'm hoping to apply them in an effective manner.
Well, on behalf of the committee, let me just welcome you to the city of New Haven. We wish you the best in your coming time with us, and we look forward to working with you in these meetings and elsewhere to make sure we have really strong oversight of our city's finances and we're making good decisions together. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
No questions of anybody about the monthly financial report? Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a member of the public who wishes to testify on this or any item that we've heard this evening? Is there a member of the public who wishes to testify on either item that we heard this evening? And for a third time, is there a member of the public here who wishes to testify on either of these items?
Alder Festa.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to close the public portion.
Second.
The motion's been made to close the public portion and seconded. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion carries. We are closing the public portion of this meeting. We heard earlier this evening that the maker of item 1 wishes us to proceed in the most quick, speedy way faster, the speediest way possible, which would be to ask the full board to discharge this item, which I will do. So there's no action that the committee needs to take this evening on item number 1. Do I hear a motion on item number 2? Alder Festa.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to move item number 2, our monthly budget.
And you move
To
that as a
read and
read file?
file.
Second.
Okay, so item 2 has been moved as a read and file and seconded. Any discussion of the motion to recommend that this item be read and filed? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion carries. It'll go to the board with the recommendation to read and file. Colleagues, before a motion to adjourn is appropriate, just stay tuned about August. My hope is that we will not be meeting in August, but we won't know for sure until we get a sense of if there's any urgent thing coming down the pike. But it's my goal that we will take the month of August off from this meeting. Having said that, a motion to adjourn is appropriate.
So moved. Second.
Motion to adjourn has been moved and seconded. Any discussion of that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion carries. We are adjourned.